economy machine works in 30 minutes. The economy looks like a simple machine, but many people don't understand it, or they don't agree on how it works, and this has led to a lot of needless economic suffering. I feel a deep sense of responsibility to share my simple but practical economic template. Though it's unconventional, it has helped me to anticipate to sidestep for global financial crisis, and it's worked well for me for over 30 years. Let's begin. Though the economy might seem complex, it works in a simple mechanical way. It's made up of a few simple parts and a lot of simple transactions and repeated over and over again a zillion times. These transactions are above or as driven by human nature, and they create three main forces drive the economy. Number one, productivity growth. Number two, the short-term debt cycle. Then number three, the long-term cycle. When we look at these three forces, how rank them on top of each other create a good template for tracking economic movements and figuring out what's happening now. Let's start with the simply first of the economy, transactions. An economy with the simplest sum of transactions will make it up. And a transaction is a very simple thing. You make a transaction all the time. Every time you buy something, you create a transaction. Each transaction consists of a buyer exchanging money or credit with the seller for goods, services, or financial assets. Credit spends just like money, so adding together money spent, amount credit spent, you could know the total spending. The total amount of spending drives the economy. If you divide the amount spent by the quantity sold, you get the price. And that's it. That's a transaction. It's the building block of the economic machine. All cycles in all forces in an economy driven by human transaction. So if you understand transaction, you can understand whole economy. Our market consists of all the buyers or the sellers making transactions with the same thing. For example, there is a wheat market, a car market, a stock market, and market is for millions of things. An economy consists of all the transactions with all of its market. If you add up the total spending and the total quantity sold in all of the markets, that's about everything you need to know to understand the economy. It's just that simple. People, businesses, banks, and governments all engage in transactions that we just described. Describe exchanging money and credit for goods, services, or financial assets. The biggest buyer and seller is the government, which consists of two important parts. A central government that collects taxes and spends money, and a central bank, which is different from other buyers and sellers because it controls the amount, money, and credit in the economy. It does this by influencing interest rates and printing new money. For these reasons, as you will see, the central bank is an important player in the flow of credit. I want you to pay attention to credit. Credit is the most important part of the economy and probably the least understood. It's the most important part because the biggest and most volatile part. Just like buyers and sellers go to the market to make transactions, so do lenders and borrowers. Lenders usually want to make their money into more money, and borrowers usually want to buy something they can't afford, like a house or a car, when they want to invest in something like standing up businesses. Credit can help both lenders and borrowers get what they want. The borrowers promise to repay the amount they borrow, called principal, plus an additional amount called interest. When interest rates are high, there is less borrowing because it's expensive. When interest rates are low, borrowing increases because it's cheaper. When borrowers promise to repay and lenders believe them, credit is created. Any two people can agree create credit out of thin air. That seems simple enough, but credit is tricky because it has different name. As soon as credit is created, it immediately returns debt. Debt is both an asset to the lender and a liability to the borrower. In the future, when the borrower repays the loan plus interest, the asset and the liability disappear, and transaction is zero. So why is credit so important? Because when a borrower receives credit, he is able to increase the spending. And remember, spending drives the economy. This is because one person's spending is another person's income. Think about it. Every dollar you earn spends someone else earns, and every dollar you earn someone else spends. So when you spend more, someone else earns more. When someone else's income rises, you make the lenders more willing to lend him money because now he works worthy credit. A credit-worthy borrower has two things: the ability to pay, the collateral. Having a lot of income in relation to his that gives him the ability to repay. In the event that he can't repay, he has a valuable asset to use as collateral that can be sold. This makes lenders feel comfortable lending you money. So increased income allows increased borrowing, which allows increased spending. And so one person's spending is another person's income. This leads to more increased borrowing and so on. But this reinforcing pattern leads to economic growth, and is why we have cycles. In a transaction, you have to give something in order to get something. And how much you get depends on how much you produce. Over time, we learn, and the accumulated knowledge raises our living standard. We call this productivity growth. Those who are inventive and hardworking raises their productivity and their living standard faster than those who are complacent and lazy. But that is necessarily true of the short run. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much, so it's not a big drive with economy swings. That is because it allows us to consume more than we produce more required, and it forces the consumer less you produce when you have to pay it back. That swings the record because too big side. While most people fear the swings, they typically don't see them as cycles because they see them too up close day by day, week by week. In this chapter, we are going to step back and look at these three processes and how that interact to make up our experience. And as mentioned, the swings along the line are not due to how much innovation or hard work there is. They are primarily due to how much credit there is. Let's for a second imagine an economy without credit. In this economy, only way I increase my spending is to increase my income, which requires me to be more productive and more work. Increases productivity is only way for growth. Since my spending is another person's income, the economy grows every time I or anyone else is more productive. If we follow the transactions and play this out, we see a progression like the productivity growth line. But because we borrow, we have cycles. This is due to any law or regulation. It's due to human nature and the way credit works. Think of borrowing as simply a way of pulling spending forward. In order to buy something you can afford, you need to spend more you make. To do this, you essentially need to borrow from your future self. In doing so, create a time in the future that you need to spend less than you make in order to pay it back. It very quickly example cycles. Basically, anytime you borrow, you create a cycle. This is true for individual as it is in economy. This is why understanding credit is so important, because it sets into motion a mechanical, productive series of events happen in the future. This makes credit different from money. Money is what you settle transactions with. When you buy your beer bartender with cash, the transaction is settled immediately. But when you buy your bill of credit, it's related to bartender. You're saying but promise to pay in the future. Together, you and the bartender create an asset and a liability. You just create a credit out of thin air. It's not a paid bartender later that the asset and the liability disappear, the debt goes away, and the transaction is settled. The reality is that most of what people call money is the actual credit. The total amount of credit is in the United States $50 trillion, and the total amount of money is only about $3 trillion. Remember, in an economy without credit, the only way increases my spending produce more. But in an economy with credit, you can also increase spending by borrowing. As a result, an economy with credit is spending and allows incomes to rise faster than productivity over the short run, but not over the long run. Now don't get me wrong. Credit isn't necessarily something bad that just causes cycles. It's bad when the finances overconsumption that can be paid back. However, it's good when you present or case your system and produce income so you can pay back the debt. For example, if you borrow money to buy a big TV, if it doesn't generate income, pay back the debt. But if you borrow money to save a tractor, and the tractor lets you harvest more crops and earn more money, then you can pay back your debt and improve your living standards. In an economy with credit, we can follow the transactions to see how the credit creates growth. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are $100,000 and have no debt. Your credit worthy borrow $10,000, say on a credit card. So you can spend $110,000 even though only on $100,000. Since your spending here is another person's income, someone is earning $110,000. The person is earning $110,000 with no debt can borrow $11,000, so he can spend $121,000, even though he only earns $110,000. His spending is another person's income, and by following the transaction, you can begin to see how the process works in a self-reinforcing pattern. But remember, borrowing created cycles. And if the cycle goes up, it eventually needs to calm down. This leads into the short-term debt cycle. As economic activity increases with an expansion, the prospect short-term debt cycle. Spending continues to increase and prices start to rise. This happens because the increase in spending is fueled by credit, which can be created instead out of thin air. And the amount of spending and incomes grow faster than the production of goods, prices rise. When prices rise, we call this inflation. The central bank doesn't want too much inflation because it causes problems. Seeing prices rise, it raises their interest rates. With higher interest rates, fewer people can afford to borrow money, and the cost of existing debt rises. Think about this as the monthly payments on your credit card going up. Because people borrow less and have higher debt payments, they have less money left over to spend, so spending slows. And since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes drop, and so on and so forth. And people spend less, price go down. We call this deflation. Economic activity decreases and you have a recession. If the recession becomes too severe and inflation no longer a problem, the central bank will lower interest rates because everything to pick up again. With lower interest rates, debt repayments are reduced and borrowing and spending pick up, and you see the other machine. As you can see, the economy works like a machine. Expansion. The short-term debt cycle spending is constrained only by willingness to lend and borrow to provide receive credit. When credit isn't easily available, there is economic expansion. When credit isn't easily available, there is a recession. And note that this cycle controls primarily by the central bank. The short-term debt cycle typically lasts 5 to 8 years and happens over and over again for decades. But notice that the bottom and top of each cycle finish with more growth previous cycle and with more debt. Why? Because people push it. They have inclination borrowing, spend, work instead of paying back the debt. It's human nature. Because this, over long periods of time, debts rise faster than incomes, create a long-term debt cycle. Despite people becoming more indebted, lenders even more periodically extend credit. Why? Because everyone thinks things are going great. People are just focused on what's been happening lately. And what's been happening lately? Incomes have been on rise. asset values are going up. The stock market loses. It's a boom. It pays to buy goods, services, and financial assets with borrow money. When people do a lot of that, we call it a bubble. So even though debts have been growing, incomes have been growing nearly as fast to offset them. Let's call the ratio of debt to income the debt burden. So long as incomes continue to rise, the debt burden stays manageable. At the same time, the asset values soar. People borrow a huge amount of money buying asset investment, causing prices to rise even higher. People feel wealthy. So even though the accumulation lots of debt, rising incomes, asset values help borrow remain creditworthy long time. But this obviously can continue to ever, and it doesn't. Over decades, debt burden slowly increases, creating larger and larger debt repayments. At some point, debt repayment started growing faster than incomes, forcing people to cut back on the spend. And this is one person's spending is on another person's income, incomes begin to go down, which makes people less creditworthy, causing borrowing to go down. Debt repayments continue to rise, which makes spending to drop even further, and the cycle reverses itself. This is the long-term debt peak. Debt burden simply become too big. But the United States, Europe, World War happened in 2008. A time for the two same reasons happened in Japan in 1989, and in the United States back in 1929. Now the economy begins to deleverage. In a deleveraging, people cut spending, incomes fall, credit disappears, asset prices drop, banks get squeezed, the stock market crashes, social tension rises, and the whole stock phenomenon steps the other way. As incomes fall, the repayments rise, borrowers get squeezed. No longer creditworthy, credit drops up, and borrowers no longer borrow enough money to make it a debt repayment. Scrambling to bear this war, borrowers are forced to sell assets. The rush to sell assets flows the market at the same time as spending falls. And this is the stock market collapses, the real estate market tanks, and banks get into trouble. As asset prices drop, the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops. This makes borrowers even less creditworthy. People feel poor, credit rapidly disappears, less spending, less income, less wealth, less credit, less borrowing, and so on. It's a vicious cycle. This appears similar to the recession, but the difference here is that interest rates can be lowered to insane to them. In recession, lowering interest rates was similar to borrowing. However, in a deleveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work because interest rate already soon hit 0%, so the stimulation ends. Interest rates in the United States hit 0% during the deleveraging of the 1930s and again in 2008. The difference between a recession and a deleveraging is that in a deleveraging, borrowers' debt burdens have simply gotten too big and can be relieved by lower interest rates. Lenders realize that debt have become too large and to ever be fully paid back. Borrowers have lost their ability to repay, and their collateral has lost value. They feel crippled by the debt. They don't even want more. Lenders stop lending, borrowers stop borrowing. Think of the economy as being not creditworthy, just like an individual. So what do you do about deleveraging? The problem is debt burden is too high and must come down. There are 4 ways this can happen. 1. People, businesses, and governments cut their spending. 2. Debts are reduced through default and restructuring. 3. Wealth is redistributed from the haves to the have-nots. Finally, 4. The central bank printing new money. These 4 ways are what happened every deleveraging in modern history. Usually spending is cut first. As we just saw, people, businesses, and even governments tied their belts, cut their spend so that came back their debt. This is often referred to as austerity. When borrowers stop taking on new debt and start paying down old debt, you might expect the debt burden to decrease. But the opposite happens. Because spending is cut, and one man's spending is another man's income, it causes incomes fall. Therefore, faster than debt are repaid, and the debt burden actually gets worse. As we've seen, this cut in spending is deflationary and painful. Businesses are forced to cut costs, which means less jobs and higher unemployment. This leads to the next step. Debt must be reduced. Many borrowers find themselves unable to repay their loans, and the borrowers that are lenders to assets. When a borrower doesn't repay the bank, people get nervous that the bank won't be able to repay them, so they rush to withdraw their money from the bank. Banks get squeezed, and people, businesses, and banks default on their debt. This is severe economic contraction. It's a depression. A big part of the depression is people discovering much of what they thought was their wealth isn't really there. Let's go back to the bar. When you bought a beer and put in a bar tab, you promise to repay the bartender. You promise you cannot asset the bartender. But if you break a promise, if you don't pay it back, you essentially default on bartender. Then the asset is working anything. It has basically disappeared. Many lenders don't want their asset to disappear and agree to debt restructuring. Debt restructuring means lenders get paid back less, or get paid back over a longer time frame, or at a lower interest rate than was first agreed. Somehow, contract is broken in a way that reduces debt. Lenders would rather have a little of something than all of nothing, even though that disappears. Debt restructuring causes income and asset values to disappear faster. So the debt burden continues to get worse. Like cutting spending, debt reduction is also the painful and deflation. All of this impacts the central governments because lower incomes and less employment means the government collects fewer taxes. At the same time, it increases spending because unemployment has risen. Many of the employed have inadequate savings and need financial support from the government. Additionally, governments create stimulus plans and increase their spending to make up for the decreases in the economy. Government budget deficit explode in the deleveraging because they spending more than they earn in taxes. This is what's happening when you hear about the budget deficit on the news. To fund their deficit, governments need to either raise taxes or borrow money. But with incomes falling and so many unemployed, who is the money going to come from? The rich. Since governments need more money and since wealth is heavily constrained in the hands of a small percentage of the people, governments naturally raise taxes on the wealthy, which facilitates redistribution of wealth in the economy. From the haves to the have-nots, but have-nots who are suffering begin to resent the wealth they have. The world is being squeezed by the weak economy, falling asset prices, and higher taxes begin to resent the have-nots. If the depression continues, social disorder can break out. Not only the tension drives the incomes can rise between countries, especially better incredible countries. 3. In the 1930s, this led to Hitler coming to power, warring Europe and depression in the United States. The pressure to do something to end the depression increases. Remember, most of what people thought was money was actually credit. So when credit disappears, people don't have enough money. People are desperate for money, and you remember who can print money? The central bank can. Having already lowered in interest rate to near zero, it's forced to print money. Unlike current spending, debt reduction, and redistribution, printing money is inflationary and stimulus. Inevitably, and the central bank prints new money out of thin air and use it to buy financial assets and government bonds. It happened in the United States during the Great Depression. And again in 2008, when the United States Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, printed over $2 trillion. Other central banks around the world that could print a lot of money too. By buying financial assets with his money, it helps drive up asset prices, which makes people more creditworthy. However, this only helps those who own financial assets. You see, the central bank can print money, but it can only buy financial assets. The central government, on the other hand, can buy goods and services and put money in the hands of the people, but it can't print money. So in order to stimulate the economy, the two must cooperate. By buying government bonds, the central bank essentially leads the money to governments, allowing it to run and increase spending on goods and services through its stimulus programs and unemployment benefits. This increases people's income as well as the government's debt. However, it will lower the economy's total debt burden. This is very risky time. Policy will go into balance for ways that debt burdens come down. The deflationary was need to balance with inflationary ways in order to maintain stability. If balanced collectively, there can be a beautiful deleveraging. You see, deleveraging can be ugly or it can be beautiful. How can I be deleveraging be beautiful? Even though deleveraging is a difficult situation, handling a difficult situation in the best possible way is beautiful, a lot more beautiful than the debt-fueled unbalanced excesses that the leverage face. In a beautiful deleveraging, debts decline relative to income. Real economic growth is possible, and inflation isn't the problem. It is achieved by having the right balance. The right balance requires a certain mix of cutting spend, reducing debt, transferring backward, and printing money so that economic and social stability can be maintained. People escape printing money will release inflation. It won't if it offsets falling credit. Remember, spending is what matters. A dollar of spending paid for with money has the same effect on price as dollar of spending paid for with credit. By printing money, the central bank can make up for the disappearance of credit when it increases in the amount of money. In order to turn things around, the central bank needs to not only pump up income growth, but get the rate of income growth higher than the rate of interest on the accumulated debt. So what do I mean by that? Basically, income needs to grow faster than debt growth. For example, let's assume that a country going to deleveraging has a debt-to-income ratio of 100%. That means the amount of debt is the same as the amount of income the entire country makes in a year. Now think about the interest rate on that debt. Let's say it's 2%. If debt is growing at 2% because of that interest rate and income is only growing in around 1%, you will never reduce the debt burden. You need to print enough money to get the rate of income growth above the rate of interest. However, printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to do and people prefer it to the alternatives. The key is to avoid printing too much money and causing unacceptably high inflation, the way Germany did that during its deleveraging in the 1920s. If policymakers achieve the right balance, or deleveraging is so dramatic. Growth is slow, but the burdens go down. That's beautiful deleveraging. When incomes begin to rise, borrowers begin to appear more creditworthy. When borrowers appear more creditworthy, lenders begin to lend money again. Debt burdens finally begin to fall. If they borrow money, people can spend more. Eventually, the economy begins to grow again, leading to the inflation phase of the long-term debt cycle. Though the deleveraging process can be hard if handled badly. If handled well, it will eventually fix the problem. It takes still roughly a decade or more for debt burdens to fall in economic activity to get back to normal, hence the term lost decade. In closing, of course, the economy is a little bit more complicated than this template suggests. However, like the short-term debt cycle on top of the long-term debt cycle, and then put that on top of the productivity goal line. Give us a reasonably good template for seeing where we've been, where we are now, and where we are probably headed. So in summary, there are 3 rules of thumb that I'd like you to take away from this. First, don't have the rise faster than income run because your debt burdens will eventually crush you. Second, don't have income rise faster than productivity because you will eventually become incompatible. And third, you do all that you can to raise your productivity because in the long run, that's what matters most. This is simple advice for you, and it's simple advice for policymakers. You might be surprised, but most people, including most policymakers, don't pay enough attention to this. This template has worked for me, and I hope it will work for you. Thank you.